if you can't create a standard or an agreement, holding an expectation is just going to set you up for frustration.
Unmet expectations are a signal that there is a lack of mutually agreed standards.
There's really three ways to deal with it. I remember when I was about 10 years old, we were on the phone with this individual, and it was very clear to me, even as a 10-year-old, that the person we were on the phone with was very incompetent. So I looked at my dad and jokingly said, like a bit of a smartass, this guy is not very bright, huh? And my dad just very calmly looked at me and he's like, Itamar, if he was supposed to be a professor at Harvard, he'd be a professor at Harvard. He wouldn't be on the phone with us right now. So to kind of put this back on you, the many people that anger you in your life, how much of it do you really think is about expectations versus anything else? Have you ever felt like you're about to lose your mind because someone just isn't getting it? Maybe it's a staff member, your partner, or the guy at DMV who looks at you like you just spoke in an alien language. And no matter how much meditation, breathwork, or therapy you've done, the frustration still hits like a freight train. So I got a great question from someone struggling with this exact issue. They've done all the self-work, the meditation, the breathwork, the gratitude list, therapy, all of it. But they still find themselves wanting to take a flamethrower to people when there's certain situations where there's sheer incompetence. So if you can relate to that, this episode is going to be for you. Today, I'm going to share a very unconventional approach that might sound a bit unkind at first, but paradoxically, it can help you, and it's definitely helped me become much more patient and actually more kind. So we're going to be talking about acceptance, but not in the soft, fluffy, just be at peace kind of way, but in a real practical way that actually removes frustration in the moment and allows you to actually be more compassionate, more kind, and not get as agitated. So let's dive in. So welcome to the pod, Alex. First off, before we get started, any thoughts on this subject?
Thank you, Itamar. Great to be here. I have a lot of problems with a lot of people, so let's find out why.
Cool. So I'll share a story to kind of get us started where I really learned this. So I remember when I was about 10 years old, we lived in the States and we went on a road trip. And this was before, booking.com and all that. And you had to call AAA in order to help you book a hotel wherever you were going. And my father, who was a very accomplished individual and also a very high performer with a lot of high demands, like in his business and his work. He was also a colonel of the army. We were on the phone with this individual. And it was very clear to me, even as a 10-year-old, that the person we were on the phone with was very incompetent. He was just not getting it. He was messing things up. And it's something that should have been simple. Just help us book a hotel. And so I looked at my dad and jokingly said, like a bit of a smartass, this guy is not very bright, huh? And my dad just very calmly looked at me and he's like, Itamar, if he was supposed to be a professor at Harvard, he'd be a professor at Harvard. He wouldn't be on the phone with us right now. And to a lot of people, that might sound like something very cruel to say or like he's being mean or condescending. But in reality, when I observed it, that kind of frame allowed my father to remain calm and actually be very courteous with this individual and very nice to him instead of getting frustrated and annoyed and perhaps rude. And what he said, like it really stuck with me in the fact that sometimes just accepting that this is where this person is supposed to be, it relieves a lot of the thing that annoys us about them. And I know it's not the most nice thing to say these days. You're supposed to see everybody, for their limitless potential. Everyone's amazing. They should be amazing. But in some way, having that kind of thought pattern, like everybody should be amazing, it's just going to create frustration because not everyone is amazing. And that's the reality of it. Like 50% of the people are the bottom 50%, so to speak. And us accepting that and just being able to say, you know what, this guy is doing whatever he's doing with what he's capable of doing, the local barista, the whatever it may be, by diffusing that expectation, it actually allows us to be nicer from what I've experienced. And that's what I want to talk about today, about how a lot of times when people think, oh, you just need more breath work, you need more meditation, you need more therapy, like, man, sometimes we've already done that. It's not about us being able to react better to the situation. It's about changing how we view the situation because of our expectation from it.
Awesome. Looking forward to getting into it.
Cool. So this might not be a very long pod. We'll see how it goes. But basically, I think this is the biggest thing that the more we can have realistic expectations, the less need we have for all the things that help us calm down, like the breath work, the visualizing I'm at the end of my life, will I actually care about this or not? It's like all those things are basically answers to what do you do after, let's say, like lower level you, the emotional part of you already starts popping off. But again, that's always less effective than saying, how can I avoid having lower level me even pop off? And again, the biggest way to do that is just by recalibrating your expectation. Like that employee that you have, he's not supposed to be at your level. He's not supposed to have it as entrepreneurial of a mind as you or whatever it may be. Otherwise, he might not be your employee. He might be your competitor. That barista might not know, even if he gets this was the guy's example, even if he gets the order wrong the third or fourth time that you've been to that same coffee shop, it's like, if you can go with the expectation that, you know what, most likely than not, they're going to get my order wrong. Like life is still pretty good aside from that. Instead of saying like, if they don't get my coffee wrong, if they should get my coffee right or whatever it may be, and getting that frustrated, you can make a big difference. So to kind of put this back on you, the many people that anger you in your life, how much of it do you really think is about expectations versus anything else?
All of it. All of it. It's my expectation with the barista, how that barista should have served me. It's my expectation of an employee or a business partner. All of it stems from me having an expectation, the individual not acting in alignment with my expectation. And it's that sort of conflict with reality, or the friction with reality, is where the frustration or negative emotions arise from.
Cool. So this is the point I want to get into. We all, like, I think anybody who's done enough kind of, let's call it self-help, knows the dangers of having too many different desires. Because those desires don't get met, then you get frustrated. Expectations are just desires of how we want things to be. Now, that's why I think it's very important to choose who we have expectations from. And to like to level that. Again, the random person, like the random barista or the random person that's, like you're calling, how do you say, like a support line or whatever it may be. Like you should go in there with very, very low expectations. Now, there are some places like where the next question that a lot of people are going to ask, but like, what about important people in my life, like the employees or the spouse or whatever it may be? And there, you really got to calibrate your expectations and see. Sometimes the situation is mendable, sometimes it's not. And there's really, the way I look at it, 3 ways to deal with this. And it's obviously not my perspective. It's many Greek people before me. You can change it, leave it, or accept it. So like you can change the situation, whether it's like to train your staff better, to leave, to like optimize your system, whatever it may be. Or you can leave it. You can fire the person. You can never return to the restaurant. You can break up that relationship, whatever it may be. Or you can accept it and recalibrate your expectations to reality. Now, where I think the nuance in this is that it's not a black and white. Now, I see this in relationships, whether it's with employees or with significant others a lot, is that they don't do one thing well, and that one expectation of them causes you to get really agitated. And that causes people to say, like, it just paints the entire picture black or white, so to speak. So saying this is just this one vertical of how they do certain thing. I can't accept it, so I should just leave it, so to speak. So first off, am I making sense with this? Because we're putting a couple of principles together here.
Yeah, I definitely feel that pendulum swing of feeling like something's not working and giving up on it is likely a result of is it an emotional reaction to the mission not being completed, but the expectations of other people fulfilling certain functions. I'd love to hear your perspective on how we correctly should calibrate people's relationships to us, or how do you have any tools to identify a specific function so that we can have more accurate expectations and avoid all the unnecessary add-ons?
So I'll reframe that in a bit of a different way and tell me if this is hitting. basically, how can we know if one thing that causes us an exorbitant amount of frustration is worth tearing the relationship over? Is that correct?
In a close relationship, yeah, but even just in a surface level relationship.
So, what's an example of a surface level relationship?
The barista analogy.
Just honestly, I think with those, the simplest way to go about it is to have low expectations.
Yes.
So, like, try to clarify. Like, we've both lived in third world countries where you'll say exactly what you need, and it will not come like that. And we've always also, I'm sure you've seen this. There's the people that get really frustrated and angry about that. And then there's the people that have lived there for like 20 years and they're like, this is just what it is.
Yeah.
Now, what's natural is for a lot of like the high performers to be like, I don't want to accept that. That's not okay for me. I don't want to accept mediocrity in my life. And I think that's where things can get a bit challenging because that just says that everything has to be perfect all the time. And that's going to waste a lot of energy where it's not needed. That's on a macro level. Like with the barista, just like have an expectation that they're going to mess up your food order sometimes. It's just what it is. So this shouldn't be the thing that shifts you out of like you living a great life. And this guy has a great life. He's built a very successful business, has a great life. Great individual. Like, it's just about calibrating the expectations. When is it worth for me to be annoyed and when is it not? If it's a key employee and they're doing the important thing they're supposed to be doing incorrectly, I absolutely cannot accept that. If it's my spouse, let's call it like there's infidelity or something really big, absolutely cannot accept that. If it's like the way they leave their coffee mug on the table, is this really worth having an expectation that it shouldn't be like this? Or is it the employee once forgetting to fill out a certain form that doesn't actually matter? Like just accepting that little bit of human error here and there. And I think it's all about just us modulating what's important to us and what's not. And again, like if you go to a fast food restaurant expecting Michelin service, like whose fault is it that you're disappointed? It's kind of that. And I think the more we can look at that and the narrower we can go with that with specific people that are important to us, but also recognize where am I willing to accept having low expectations of them in this specific vertical, it can all of a sudden relieve a lot of pressure and a lot of the tension in those, again, personal or professional relationships.
One way I've tried to, I know that you've ruffled some feathers in the past with communicating this concept to people, and I've even taken exception to some sound bites that you've shared at times, and only upon reflection has it made sense and I've fully understood it. I think another way to view it is rather than say low expectations would be neutral expectations. If there's a neutral expectation, say for a barista, I'm expecting that they understand my order. If I say a latte or Americano, they can, with some degree of consistency, whatever product comes out at the tail end is relative to what I ordered, and that whole process happens within a reasonable time frame. That would be a neutral expectation. If I'm expecting them to be charismatic, and to
why do you feel
facts,
uncomfortable saying I should have a low expectation? I can tell you're resisting. That's not okay.
Because I think that the low expectation is a negative. So if I was drawing a chart,
Why again? But again, like, why is that not okay to say? Like, from some of these people, like, again, like, I'll give a very personal example. So my wife is not Israeli. When October 7th happened, she did not, like, when I speak about this from like an outside perspective, shockingly, the person who's not Israeli didn't deal with the stress of the war incoming, as well as the guy who was in special operations for 10 years. You know what I mean? Shockingly. At the moment, my expectation was that she should, like, this is just what it is. This is what we're going to have to do. This is how we move forward. And we're just going to need to act like robots right now because it's war and this is what we need to do. That was an unrealistic expectation, honestly, to put on anybody that doesn't have that level of training. And even for me, I also had my emotional hiccups, but I put that expectation on her. I should have had a more, whether you want to call it realistic or a lower expectation, like someone who doesn't have that kind of background, they're probably not going to react the same way to this situation. By me not having that more realistic, lower expectation of how they're going to react, it stopped me from actually being more empathetic and more kind to her. And it created a negative outcome. Like if I genuinely believe that if from the get-go, when that happened, I'd be like, okay, I need to have a lower expectation for how she's going to react to this than how I would anticipate me reacting to this, for example. It would have allowed for me to be a kinder husband, a better husband to her. And in turn, she would have actually been able to be more supportive to me. But it was because that specific vertical net expectation, I needed to have lower expectations.
In a business setting,
Mm-hmm.
do you think that expectations compensate for clear standards that can be measured through math or through like relatively hard data? And expectations might be a signal. So if I had a lot of expectations on a subordinate, but no clear KPI that I could refer to a dashboard or plot some hard data on, might that be a reflection that I've got a whole bunch of loosey-goosey expectations, but no clear definition of performance?
Yeah. And again, it kind of bleeds into the difference between an expectation and an agreement. An expectation is just something that you think how people should act. An agreement is something that you've communicated clearly, they've communicated back to their understanding, you're all on board. Now, again, if it's a kind of person in your life or like an employee where you have these key agreements and they're not fulfilling it, that's a problem. If it's just somebody random that you have an expectation of, or even like an expectation, let's say, of that employee, but that you haven't communicated, if you want to take full responsibility of your life, that's not that. So again, like, and there's situations where it's not likely that you're going to have an agreement with the local barista. Like, hey, can we agree that if I do this, you're going to make the extra effort to make sure it's 100% okay, or whatever it may be. It's like, that's where it's just not worth having these expectations of you. It's just going to set you up for frustration. Like this, is where we said, like the whole change it, leave it, or accept it. If it's worth having an agreement, change the situation, talk about it, train them better, have this agreement, whatever it may be. If it's just a non-negotiable, then leave it. Or if it's just one part of that employee that you're saying, this is just probably not going to change. This is one of their innate traits. They're not as a creative thinker as I want. They're a phenomenal linear thinker, but they're not as good as a creative thinker. But you know what? They're still phenomenal at the job. This is where you have to lower that expectation, just accept that this is what it is, if it's still serving you. But I think just having a more realistic perspective on it, saying like from some people, I need to expect less in some verticals, allows you to see them for their like what they're really good at, and in a way that allows you to be kinder and nicer, paradoxically.
In your former life, did you have a clear way to separate between what's a standard and what's an expectation? So I might say a standard are these fitness standards, because if you can't do these things, or shooting standards or whatever, because the consequences of you not being at or above these standards is extreme. So there's standards. I'm also expecting that you're a team player. I'm expecting that you take a certain perspective on certain topics. Do you have an ability or a pre-existing framework of what's a standard, what's an expectation?
It's interesting because like when I'm really thinking back to it, there were no expectations. There were just clear standards.
Mm.
There wasn't that like, oh, okay, it's like this is everything you're supposed to do, and this is a nice to have. It's like this is what we need from you, and this is what it is. Like even the softer parts, so let's say like not being an asshole. There were I don't know the term in English, but there were tests that basically like everybody would rank the other people on the team, and a sociometric exam, I think it's called. And like if your score was below a certain number, that's not a fit. Like, everything was a standards. There were no unwritten expectations of you.
Yeah, I think that's why I've always had a fascination with military culture as a person who's never done any military experience. Because I've had a long track record of friction with employees in businesses, because I've put a lot of expectations on them. Only through hindsight was I able to realise what I was doing at the time, and I've had a lot less of that as I've matured, because I rely a lot less on expectations and just very, very clear standards. It's like, put these things, like these screws in these holes at this way at this time, always and forever. If you do that, I don't really need to expect much, because you're now serving the function of that machine. Whereas previously, I would have expected them to do those same things, but also want to innovate and also think about how to do the same thing better or faster, I'll lump a whole bunch of unnecessary expectations onto the function, other than just defining the function through standards, and then just making sure that people actually achieve those standards.
And so, to kind of summarize what I'm hearing from you as a good kind of rule for life is that if you can't create a standard or an agreement, holding an expectation is just going to set you up for frustration.
Mm.
And I think that's the big takeaway. That's what I was trying to say to that guy. Dude, if you're just having all these expectations of things that you can't control, you can't have an agreement about, or you can't set a standard about, you're just going to get frustrated all the time. That's one. Two, also accept where some things are if you can accept preemptively that in these areas, this person is going to have lower output than what I would like for it to be, and I can recalibrate my expectation to that, I'm actually probably going to be able to be much nicer to them. And I'm actually going to be kinder to them than just believing, oh, they should be amazing. They could be the best ever at everything. And I know this whole topic is a bit, controversial or whatever you want to call it, because we're not just saying, hey, believe in everybody for all they have. Like, everybody should be amazing. You should never, ever think less of anybody in any which way. But the reality is, it's just like thinking everybody's amazing creates an unrealistic expectation on a lot of people. And I think if we can actually have more realistic, we can be better towards others.
100%. I found that in business, the more I focused on standards rather than expectations, I've also avoided putting wrong people in wrong roles. Because if I was incapable of defining the standards for the specific function, it made me realize that either I was under-resourced, or I had the wrong person, and there was something else wrong. So anytime that I've been unable to identify standards and to have a ability to audit those standards on a regular basis, it's helped me realize that I've got either the wrong person in the wrong function. The function is not necessary at all, or I'm just poorly equipped to actually fill this role.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So here's kind of how I would wrap this up, so we don't just keep kind of diving into the things we don't need to dive up. Like, first off, just identify your known frustration triggers. So take a moment and preemptively ask yourself, where is my spouse perhaps likely to frustrate me? Where are my employees most likely to frustrate me? Or where do certain people in my environment constantly push my buttons? Whether it's the barista, the person that puts you on hold, whatever it is. That anticipation just in and of itself, if you do nothing else, is very powerful. Because if you can basically prepare for getting punched in the gut, you'll be better off than if it caught you off guard. That's just number one, even if you don't do anything else. Now, beyond that, you have a choice. Once you recognize these are the things that frustrate me. And again, it's that change it. And to go back to what Alex, you were saying so well, like, can you set in place a standard or an agreement? If you can do that, by there you can change it, amazing. Take action on it. If you're saying, I can't change it, and this is just a constant energy drain, and this is just, it's not worth the trade-off of what is causing me, it's just getting me so angry, leave it. Don't go to that coffee shop. If it's an employee that just needs to not be there anymore, you need to not be there anymore. Same thing with perhaps a significant other. But if you're saying, you know what, there's this fault, but still on the overall level, it's worth it, then just accept that you need to have a lower expectation around that. Like, if it's not possible to fix it and you don't want to leave it, lower your expectations. And if you can just have that more realistic perspective on it, all of a sudden you find that things frustrate you less, you get less angry, and you're able to be nicer to those people because you're just not agitated. You're able to be more polite. So does that summary kind of make sense? Bring it home?
It does. It does.
Cool. So that's kind of where I want to leave it today. Like, again, I think there's a notion that in order to be kind to people, you have to always think the best of them. And while that sounds really great in theory, when it comes into practice, people get agitated because they have unrealistic expectations of people. And having those, how you call it, you want to call it lower expectations, realistic expectations, whatever it may be, having those, whether of people in general or of a specific part of a specific person, it actually allows us to see the overall good, so to speak. By staying calm, we can be politer, we can be nicer individuals, and we can avoid all those emotional reactions that we have. Any last words on this?
What do you think of an equation on this that is similar to unmet expectations are a signal that there is a lack of mutually agreed standards, or conscious or incompetence, unconscious incompetence? So either there is no standards and the thing didn't happen because I'm upset that the thing didn't happen in a certain way or to a certain level. So we failed to mutually agree to the standards, or somebody just can't do the thing to the level required, at the speed required, and they're aware of it or unaware of it.
One more time. Yeah, said in a bit of a different way. I'm not sure if I follow.
Yeah. I'm trying. I'm just trying to selfishly instill this as a lesson that I can remember as an equation, that unmet expectations are a symptom of, or a signal of, not mutually agreed.
I would say it before that. When you sense yourself frustrated, it's probably because you either don't have an agreement or it's not being upheld. Now, if you can change it, amazing. Whether it's not being upheld, then you can change it through whatever it is, conversation, discipline, whatever it may be. Or if there's not an agreement in place, how can you place one? If it's possible and it's worthwhile, do it. And if it's not possible and you're saying it trumps all the positive I'm getting from this relationship, like I just don't want to go to this coffee shop anymore or whatever it may be, then leave it. If you're saying it's not possible, but you know what, in the aggregate, this is still a great thing, then the wisest thing to do is just to lower your expectation around that specific thing if it's not changeable. Because then you won't get frustrated by it, but you'll still be able to enjoy everything else that's really positive. Like, hey, maybe that coffee shop has amazingly comfortable seats and really fast Wi-Fi and you enjoy the cakes or whatever it may be. So if you just let go of the frustration that barista might get your order wrong every once in a while, you can enjoy everything else.
Right. Cool.
Yep. So I would love to actually hear people's thoughts on this, because I know this is a bit of a different topic and people have very different opinions on this. Please DM me or email me about your thoughts about this. I would love to hear it. And aside from that, we will see you guys on the next episode.